Dan Stanley, you are closing the chapter on the first season, shall we say, of the Helpful Executive podcast. So thank you so much for taking the time out and joining me today.
Thank you, Rob. It's a real privilege to be able to share my message with those that trust and listen to your podcast.
Well, I couldn't not have you on. I was introduced to your work, funnily enough, as I was leaving and stepping away from my very safe, very secure job to go it alone. So shout out to Sean White, who's the managing director of Forship, a maritime consultancy. He asked me what I was going off to do. I told him, and he said, "You need some Dan Stanley in your life." And then found you on LinkedIn, read the book, which we'll get onto. But if you haven't already, people read this book. So for those that don't know you, Dan, could you maybe put a little bit of meat on the bones and give us a profile into you?
Sure. I'll start with a caveat. Everything I share here isn't designed to be a message of inspiration or a message of hope. It's all about being a message of change. In 2017, despite a background of leading men in the military, I failed to lead myself. I went into my head and nearly never came out. And the consequence of that was it nearly cost me my sanity, my marriage, but also nearly my life. And it was that moment of adversity, Rob, that really challenged me to take stock of not only who I was, but where I was heading in life. And I realized that, despite my successes, I've been a retired award-winning Army Commando, national sporting champion, helping grow a 7-figure business. Almost all of my success was superficial. And it created this feeling of discomfort, a feeling of emptiness. There's an ambiguity around who I was, what I stood for, and what I wanted to use my finite time for. And typical of many, perhaps middle-aged men, I didn't share how I felt. I kind of sat in this echo chamber of isolation, marinating in my own thoughts. And I was naive enough to think that poor mental health was something that weak people got, not a man like me. And before I knew it, I was kind of having sleepless nights, kind of constantly chastising myself and being hypercritical of the future. And I kind of really suffered mentally and emotionally. And now out the other side of that, which I'm sure we'll speak more about, I run a coaching practice called BetterMen, where I work exclusively with men in high pressure roles. I've written a best-selling book, 9,000 copies sold in the first 6 months. Commonly, the messages I get, whether they're in my inbox or on Amazon reviews, is that I wish I'd read the book sooner, which we might come on to. And to the best of my knowledge, I lead the largest men's walking group in the UK. We're called Men and Mountains.
There's a lot going on there, Dan.
I'm very purpose-driven.
And well, there's a lot for us to unpack, and I'm very excited to do so. Perhaps we could start with let's start with what's going on culturally, perhaps, and then maybe we will move on to the book, because there's a lot of stuff I really want to discuss about the book, and I'm going to plug this thing nonstop during this podcast episode, because I think actually I put so I have a thing that I call a monthly read, which is every month I just share a book that I think might be useful, and generally they're quite popular. I think that the term I used with this one when I made it my monthly read was that it's not a recommendation, it's a prescription. It's very, very important that not just men, but also I think a lot of women need to read this book also to understand the complex creatures that are men. But let's talk culturally, Dan. Why are so many men struggling today? What do you think is going on?
Yeah, I really believe, Rob, that masculinity is at a crossroads. What worked for men of previous generations is no longer fit for purpose. This kind of narrow construct of professional success equal personal happiness, which, by the way, I kind of coined the term, the myth of masculinity. This idea that professional success equals personal happiness sets lots of men, many men, in fact, up to fail, particularly as they start the second half of their lives. I think that culturally nowadays, there's so many important social issues that many of us kind of think that men are still benefactors of a patriarchy that we feel no longer a part of. And whether we're looking at loneliness or poor mental health or workaholism or divorce, which are all topics that I'd like to touch upon in our conversation, I think that there is a crisis of masculinity. To give some context to that, if you think back to 1900, the average life expectancy for a man was 44. If you fast forward to 2000, the average life expectancy for a man is 74. So we've gained 3 decades of life in 1 century. And what do we do with that additional time? We work. So much of our identity is caught up in what we do around our profession and at what level that it almost informs our self-worth. And many of us forget that there's a life beyond work. And we kind of need to take a more both objective and subjective look at who we are and how we're living. And importantly, despite legacy being something that nowadays society looks as what we leave behind in terms of wealth and assets for our children, more importantly, for me, legacy is about how we equip our sons and daughters, tomorrow's men and women, with the skills to manage a complex world that we've brought them into.
I think that's incredibly deep, and I don't disagree. When you say masculinity is at a crossroads, could you put a little bit more meat on those bones?
Yeah, crossroads. Most people see crossroads nowadays, and you can tell probably by my tonality I'm excited about this. Crossroads as a crisis or a challenge, but the advantage of being stood at a crossroads is you get to see both sides. And when you make an informed decision, not one that is built around conformity and subscribing to societal narratives, but one that's built around decisions that serve you and enable you to navigate towards higher levels of health, happiness, connection, contentment, it really can be a catalyst. So instead of seeing it stood at a crossroads in their career or a relationship or whatever the context might be as a problem, I really suggest that your listenership sees a crossroads as an opportunity. In Rethinking Masculinity, the first chapter is largely highlighting what I call the top 5 challenges affecting men of today. And you're exactly right in the way that you perhaps described this as a prescription. And equally, lots of female readers they're usually women that either love or lead men. Have reached out and said that they now understand the men in their lives, whether they're personal or professionally, at a deeper level, and can understand why sometimes they're emotionally withdrawn or choose to distract themselves from the reality of life. But the first challenge that we face nowadays, for me, is workaholism. It's kind of almost a respectable addiction. We overwork and underlive, and the challenge nowadays is that most men will kind of utter the phrase, family first, but the uncomfortable truth is that for most men it's work first and family second. And particularly over the last few years with the pandemic and working from home, the lines have been blurred further between personal and professional, and typically where we like to compartmentalize life into those 2 categories, it is all just life, and nothing happens in isolation. So with so many people now kind of working from home, they might not have seen the commute for what it offered in terms of maybe some headspace or some breathing space to call their friends or to sit for the challenges or to listen to podcasts or to read books. But for so many people nowadays working from home, there is an opportunity cost associated with that. So with us kind of, in many cases, earning a living without the living, and being so time poor, the second challenge in almost this sequential narrative here is loneliness. And for me, like male loneliness is the biggest threat to not just our generational well-being, but to future generations. With a lack of governance around social media in the early noughties, and now with hindsight recognizing the impact on our mental and emotional health, nowadays with so much of our connection is digital instead of being in person and face to face, there's a real question mark and challenge around the impact of loneliness for men. There's a 2018 from recollection, the Joe Cox Commission found that there's 8 million men in the UK that feel lonely. And I had my own moment of realization. I live in an area of South Wales where we have close proximity to nature, And I was out running one morning in the woods close to my house, listening to a podcast, and the host on the podcast, raised a question that's literally stopped me in my tracks. And the question was, who would you call in your moment of need? And for me, there was this kind of significant realization that my childhood friends, the guys who I'd grown up with and gone through these rites of passage with, there was a real lack of emotional connection. And actually, I wouldn't call those guys with moments of challenge or crisis. I'd call the men that I've come to got to have known and appreciate over the last few years that I would call my growth friends. So instead of sitting with that and carrying that sense of discomfort, I reached out to my childhood friends and had a conversation and kind of, from my perspective, highlighted our need to do better, to invest more time and effort into our friendships, because they were based on moments from decades ago. And we needed to commit to making new memories and to commit to milestones in our future. So with us overworking and underliving, like kind of really investing our finite time into work, we then become lonely. And when we are lonely and we don't have the space to sound out our challenges, the reality is that poor mental health is a fact of life nowadays. And whether that is kind of regret to the past, nurturing this sense of depression, or whether it's fear of the future that shows up in terms of anxiety, there's a real stigma attached to men and the challenges around mental wellness. So when we're overworking and underliving, when we're disconnected from our friendship groups because they're transient and we haven't invested time and energy into them, and then we experience a life challenge, we simply don't have the space to seek support or to sound out our challenges, which brings us on to, I'm sure it'll be a key theme in our discussion today, the concept of midlife crisis. Kind of from a data perspective, around a third of us have, this experience of midlife crisis. And whilst it's mocked and the source of many a meme, for men like me, who in many respects it nearly cost me my marriage and my sanity and my life, it's far from a laughing matter. Maybe we'll talk more about midlife crisis later. But for me, in a simple sense, it's a case of kind of what got you here won't get you there. Right. The things that you have pursued in your life, usually around professional success, will kind of have got you the things that you thought that you wanted. But if what you wanted isn't what you need, there's a need and a necessity to realign your life to a deeper sense of meaning and purpose. So after the first four, again, to reiterate, workaholism, loneliness, poor mental health, midlife crisis, the last challenge that modern men face is the high probability or possibility of divorce. 42% of marriages end in divorce nowadays. And in the UK, the average age of divorce is 46 to 49. So when we kind of just step back from that slightly and kind of look at, well, why might that be the case? It's that time where the practicalities of raising the children and paying the bills, can kind of sometimes remove that spark and that kind of sense of enthusiasm for our relationship. And, for the truth is, for many couples, they might only be inches apart in bed at night, but they're miles apart in terms of their connection. And not wanting to be too glib around the state of modern day masculinity, but I hope here, just from this short narrative and sharing, people are asking questions, bigger questions around what's going on for men.
It's really interesting having read the book, Dan, and then hearing you talk about this in real time. And I can actually, as you were talking that through, I was starting to recognize a pattern that I had going on, which was working long hours, 50, 60, maybe 70 hours a week, international markets, regular travel, and the hook that was good salary, international recognition as being the guy or one of the guys in my sector, turning up to exotic shows like the Monaco Yacht Show and people tapping you on the shoulder and saying, "Oh, I know you from LinkedIn," or "Oh, hey, you're Rob Dunn," and these kind of cool things that I'll go home and tell my mates and flex, and but really was quite surface level. There was no depth to it. And then I found, rolling into the loneliness piece, was my relationships with my friends starting to wane because I would literally get 2 days a week to myself. So this is just me, right? This is the type of guy I am. But my staple Saturday morning is a big training session. It's my big blowout. I'm not a drinker. So I will have a big blowout on a Saturday morning, whether that's hard sparring in the gym or lifting weights, whatever it is, big session. And so that's that's a quarter of my weekend gone. Then I need to make sure I spend some time with the wife, or maybe do some stuff around the house. And making time for friendships or my relationships felt burdensome because I've now only got, less than 48 hours to kind of do my stuff, and then I'm back into work early Monday morning. And I certainly feel that I could hear the footsteps of a midlife crisis. Certainly. I don't think I was there. I'm very lucky. I've got an incredibly strong woman by my side. My wife's fantastic, and she has done a very good job of growing her business. I'm very fortunate that there was opportunities outside of what I was doing, but I could hear it. I was starting to become more miserable. I was starting to become slightly resentful that she could go on holiday, put her out of office on, and just be completely out for 2 weeks. Whereas I am on the phone, I'm closing deals.
Yeah.
And whilst it looked kind of big time, because I might be walking around with a Cuban cigar on a roof terrace in Greece somewhere on the phone, looking kind of gangster, that's not okay. That's not, I should be out. I should be zoned out, horizontal, relaxing and chilling out, and I wasn't. And so all of these things, I think what it comes down to, Dan, I don't know if you'll agree, similar to the fitness sphere, is it's compounding. Kind of one on its own, you think, I can do the hours, that's not a problem, or it's okay, I'm making good money, but they layer on top of each other, and I think that's perhaps when the house of cards comes crashing down.
Yeah. Even our vocabulary kind of should draw our attention to the reality of what's happening. The trappings of success. It kind of says it all, doesn't it? But and maybe this is the point around this midlife crisis, which is the term that we so often use. Midlife reinvention through a midlife reevaluation. I think it's a natural part of our life. You mentioned your wife, my wife as well. That ultimately women will have a natural transition. It comes around the term menopause. There's a hormonal and a kind of biological shift in their body, which kind of calls them into the second half of their lives, dependent, regardless, should I say, of their age. We don't really have that as men. We don't have this biological clock that kind of ticks us over into the second half. And instead, as a chap called David Brooks, and he talks about the two mountains of a man's life. The first mountain is around this kind of status quest, purpose or power, significance, societal success, especially the success symbols, the house, the car, the money, the holidays, the watches, etc. And that's kind of like the first mountain, Rob. And then the second mountain is around contentment, around purpose, around connection, and around meaning. And because we don't know what to do with this fairly new term of midlife, 1900, you die at 44, 2000, you die at 74. Because we don't want to do these extra 30 years, we spiral into this kind of sense of ambiguity and uncertainty. Instead of just recognizing that we're at a time of change and that we're going through this natural shift. And instead of just doing more repetitions of that first mountain, stood on rooftop terraces, smoking Cuban cigars, getting all these exotic invites, instead we should kind of move across to the second mountain. And instead of seeing it as a challenge or an obstacle, seeing it as an opportunity to really bring real depth, real connection, real meaning and purpose into our lives.
I completely agree. I think when it comes to just to touch on something you spoke about there, which I think was really interesting, you talked about the female menopause. I think, this was something that was highlighted to me by a friend of mine, actually, who's actually been on the podcast. Super smart guy, Adam Duncan. He's a great sports therapist. He's doing his PhD in osteo currently. And he highlighted that when a woman starts to transition into or up to menopause, then there's all these hormone supplements and there's all this intervention and support. Yet that's not so much the case with men. as our testosterone starts to dip, which we see a direct link between a dip in testosterone and depression, either one or the other. Depression leads to a dip in testosterone, or testosterone leads to a dip in depression. There's not as much support perhaps medically out there. There is TRT and other things, but you have to kind of fight really hard to get it. And so I think that probably plays quite an important role. But let's talk about the midlife crisis, Dan, because I think that's really interesting. My audience is the busy professional. So how do you spot a midlife crisis coming?
You feel it,
right?
And here's the issue, that most men have been kind of conditioned to not feel, and to be kind of very cognitive, with the tabs always open, a life optimized for convenience and efficiency. To kind of feel a sense of internal discomfort, these ripples of internal stress mean that so many men will kind of spiral into a sense of denial or avoidance. They'll deny what's happening to them and try to numb out or hide in work. They'll avoid through the kind of the ostrich syndrome of putting their head in the sand and hoping that it's not really happening. But that kind of feeling internally, that sense of angst, that sense of uncertainty, if we don't respond to it in a positive way, that little whisper that we have will turn into a shout. And if we don't listen to the shout, there will be ripples of adverse consequences that pass through our lives. And that was my experience, kind of growing up in a working class family in the northwest of England, backgrounds in military and sport and business. The last thing I wanted to do was to feel that sense of discomfort. I've ticked all of these societal success boxes. I drive a German car, I live in a detached house, I wear a nice watch. Like, why don't I feel the way I expected to feel? And then because I internalized that, the narrative and the dialogue became pretty toxic pretty quickly. And before I knew it, I kind of withdrew from, despite being surrounded by lots of people that loved me and appreciated me, I just withdrew from everybody. Hid in work, hid in exercise, it was a really interesting experience that at the time I thought was unique to myself. And then when I started to own my story, Rob, and here's what happened. This was a real sliding door moment for me. Me and my wife, we separated for around 8 months. I was really unwell mentally and emotionally, despite physically being perhaps in my best ever shape, because exercise became a coping strategy. We kind of anticipated that we could take our marital baggage to the Indian Ocean, specifically to the Maldives, on this make or break kind of holiday. And whilst out in the Maldives, I was reading a book called Legacy. It's about the culture of the All Blacks and at the time what made them the most successful sporting team in the world. And a few kind of sun lounges down on this really kind of boutique resort. There was a guy reading Chimp Paradox, Steve Peters, essentially how the mind works. And similar age. At the time, I was kind of winning indoor rowing championships. So I'm 6'2", kind of 15 stone, looking like an athlete. This guy was a similar kind of shape and similar condition, similar age. And he kind of looks over and gets my attention. And he kind of says, we must be the only two guys in the Maldives reading self-help books. He's like, what's your story? I tried to deflect and batter my way with a little bit of humor. There was no obvious signs that me and my wife were there to try to salvage what was left of our marriage. But nevertheless, we grabbed a beer and we sat on the beach on the white sand, turquoise ocean out in front of us. And at this point in my life, Rob, I'd never heard a man speak with such courage, with such vulnerability, with such expression. I'd always deemed kind of taking off our masks and sharing the reality of our experience to be maybe somewhat emasculating, or that people would judge or see us as inferior, particularly men amongst men. And I didn't recognize this guy, but it turned out he was an ex-Premiership footballer, played for one of the big London clubs in the noughties, lived in a penthouse apartment, drove an Italian car. He lived the footballer's lifestyle when you could get away with it before smartphones and social media. And he'd had 2 knee operations that hadn't worked. And from living in a penthouse apartment kind of in the city to spiraling into drug, gambling and prostitution, he lost everything, including his identity. And this guy, he didn't realize the profound nature of his words. But there was a moment of, post-traumatic growth that happened for me. And he said to me, Rob, the only difference in life between a grave and a rut is the depth. The only difference in life is in terms of this context is the difference between a grave and a rut. And I walked back across the beach to my wife, who she's reading a magazine, and I said, when we get home, I'm going to take some time out. And she didn't really ask any questions or kind of insist on any details, which was a good thing at the time because I didn't have any details of any specifics. Right. But on the kind of second leg from Dubai back to Heathrow, I wrote an exit plan for my business. And about 8 weeks later, I shut my business down, had some honest conversations about how I'd been feeling, particularly the state of my marriage, my mental health. And all of a sudden, all of these people, my peers who I thought had their shit together, all started to talk about their own question marks, their own uncertainties. And it kind of revolved around this kind of this idea that, that as men in midlife, we don't share our challenges. We kind of build this pedestal that looks like we've got all of our shit together, where in reality, we have the same fears, the same anxieties, the same uncertainties. And if we don't lean into them, the chances are that over time, they evolve and they become bigger. And they really do become barriers to stopping us living the life that we want or expect from ourselves. And that was the catalyst for BetterMen. I was carried a sense of frustration. And then there was a moment where I kind of thought that I'm going to make a stand here. I'm going to do something that offers good men the opportunity to live better lives. And my wife kind of joked, not really understanding the concept at the time. She said, what are you going to call it? And flippantly, I said, it's going to be like Ron Seal. It's going to do exactly what it says in the tin. And it's going to be called BetterMen. And yeah, fast forward 6 years. Whether it's helping men kind of navigate the challenges of midlife, whether that's a crisis or kind of conflict in their business or in a marriage. I've worked with hundreds of men one-to-one, help them to change or reignite their careers, to improve their profitability or to exit their businesses, to save their marriages. Even with a guy helping him prepare for BBC's Dragon's Den, where he was successful. There's just been a real richness to my life beyond money, and it's of meaning and purpose. And that's why, if anyone's listening to this, midlife crisis, usually it's a crisis of meaning. There's a fear of irrelevance. And instead of trying to push those feelings down or buy our way out of the discomfort, my suggestion to anybody hearing this would be to sit with a journal and to ask some bigger questions, like, what do I want in my life? Why don't I have it? In 10 years time, what will I regret not doing now? And it's, for me, the truth is, Rob, that we have our own answers, but we need to facilitate a way to bring those answers forward so that we can really focus on the important aspects of life, not just the needs of social media, societal success, the constant pace that's often frantic that we live life at.
I think that's very true. And I really, again, I hear you talking about the German car, got it, the watches, got them. But it's something that jumped out at me actually while you were talking about that is the amount of, you hear this with athletes quite a lot. Tyson Fury is a fantastic example. Worked his whole career to become heavyweight champion, got it. And that night is thinking, now what? It's not what I thought it would be. It hasn't given me what I thought it would give me.
Yeah.
And I can resonate with that somewhat, because there was a part of me for a long time that, and I guess this is where guys get stuck, is the first big paycheck. Because I went from, a fitness background. The fitness industry is not super well paid. And then I moved into the cruise industry, again, sales predominantly, earning okay money.
Yep.
And then the big paycheck started rolling in, and then I could go and buy, spend 4 figures on a birthday, which is fucking nuts, or buy the nice stuff, and even to the point where, and this isn't me trying to flex and be braggy, but going shopping and not really looking, just that's fine, I can get. And at first you're like, I'm the big dog, I've done it, Mum, I've made it. And the longer that goes on, it's kind of a dip. I was kind of climbing this, thinking, okay, this is awesome. This is, again, growing up with not a lot of money. very working class background.
Yep.
And then realizing that you can't buy your way out of this, Rob. And it wasn't that I was super unhappy, by the way. It was just that for me, it came to a realization of I happen to be good at this, but I don't love it. And something interesting, Dan, that I've been keen to share with you since it happened. It's happened in between our first interaction when I said, would you like to come on my podcast, and actually having this conversation. I've been working with two guys, a vice president and a director of operations, in totally separate sectors, both super successful guys. And my bag, as you'll know, and as many people listening will know, is elevating people's performance through holistic wellness. So if you really are career driven and you want to go for it, great, providing you're happy and it's what you want to do. Mm-hmm. Looking after your exercise, your nutrition, your mental health, your sleep will allow you to do that in a much better way, in a much more healthier and sustainable way. Yeah. These two guys, after about 6-8 weeks of getting their shit together, exercising more, eating well, sleeping, setting boundaries, nighttime routines, within a week, these two guys, completely separate, came to me and said, I don't think I want to do this anymore for a living. And it was just almost like a reset button. They've taken control of their lives. And I wonder if we almost get slightly blinkered. You know, we're just on, you know, go. That taking the time to get a good night's sleep and seeing how that feels, and taking the time to prep good food and eat well and look after your body, acted for these guys as a bit of a reset button. And it was like an oh shit moment. One of these guys subsequently has gone and found himself a job in a low. He demoted himself on paper. He's got less responsibility, spending more time with his kids. He's got this new passion for exercise. So I think perhaps, again, keen to hear your thoughts. Maybe we get excited about the early part of the launch, and then over time we realize that, oh no, I'm trapped.
Yeah, I think it's a real common occurrence. You know, I have a real issue with this kind of phrase of remuneration. Like, what are you being remunerated for? You know, a lack of connection in your marriage, a part-time parent, poor health. You're being paid a 6-figure salary to exist and not live. And I think that, commonly for my clients, you know, that they might have these moments of where they lift the veil and they start to experience life in new and better ways. And often, instead of it kind of being a huge, significant trajectory change, what they do is they apply small tweaks through a concept that I call self-leadership. So instead of allowing the diary to dictate their experience of life, they take ownership and responsibility for managing their diary. They start to delegate. They start to say no to meetings. They start to invite the people that they lead to step up. And with the space that they take back, usually it's somewhere around 20% of their weekly hours per week. They reinvest that time back into their health, into their wellness, into their relationships. They have a, you know, their life looks very similar. They're still getting paid the same salary, but with less stress and more time. And this is the truth, you know, that we kind of acclimatize ourselves to live at a frantic pace. And the issue with that is that we don't realize sometimes that, you know, how we're living, it is unhealthy. It is almost unsustainable, you know, which brings us on maybe to the kind of concept of burnout. The whole principle of rethinking masculinity, you know, I call it the BetterMen blueprint. You know, if we look at how men of previous generations lived, the self-worth and the kind of the core of the foundation was professional success. You know, and it's not unfair to say that, you know, that was a byproduct of the times. The baby boomers, you know, for argument's sake, the national message that they were subjected to was to rebuild the country through its economy. So they had to throw themselves into work. Yep. Then that comes online with the kind of idea of clever commercial marketing, and consumerism is born. So we end up then keeping up with the Joneses, and we end up in the rat race where we're using our wealth and our assets that our professional success creates to buy the trappings of success. And then with the little time that we have left, we kind of give that to our relationships. But still, there was very clear roles between the man and the woman in a kind of conventional relationship. And the thing that we'd leave to last is kind of paradoxically ourself. And this is where the BetterMen blueprint kind of flips that on its head. Our self becomes our foundation, our health, our happiness, our relationships, our sense of meaning and purpose. On top of that, we then use our wealth and assets to, in fact, no, we look at our relationships. We create these moments of connection. We make sure that all of our relationships are invested in and that are moving towards a sense of flourishing. Then we use our wealth and our assets to make memories that we'll never forget. And it might be that you drop 4 figures on a significant birthday, but it's not just on a possession or an item. It's on an experience that will never be forgotten. And then the thing furthest away from the foundation is continued professional success by realigning ourselves to how we interact with our diary and our work, by almost, in a sense, changing our identity. So instead of sharing our identities built based on what we do, it's more about who we're becoming, how we serve others. And it's not for everybody, Rob. The changes that you took, stepping away from a highly lucrative career to taking a path of uncertainty, but at the same time trusting yourself that the path would give you rewards that you couldn't get financially. So many men will be kind of feel trapped by the life that they've worked hard to build. But the reality is, if we don't respond to that feeling of dissatisfaction or discontentment, over time it will fester and it will grow. And instead of our challenges being small enough to manage, perhaps with the help of a coach or a confidant or whatever it might be, we end up at this point where we have some moment of crisis.
I get that totally, and I really like in the book how the old ways and the new blueprint are side by side in a pyramid. And funnily enough, when I picked the book up today, picked it off the bookshelf, just to continue plugging it, go and get this book, people. I actually had it open at that, or I had a bookmark in here at that page, and I kept looking back at it because something that I just can't shake as of recently, I just keep thinking about it. And maybe it's because I lost my 96-year-old granddad a couple of weeks ago, and he worked into his 60s. My dad is in his mid 60s. He's semi-retired, but still working.
Yeah.
And I just started to, it's a bit morbid, right? But you start maybe thinking about your own mortality a little bit. I'm 36 now. I've got a newborn. And you just kind of think about losing the head of the family with my granddad, and we all slide up one.
Yeah.
And realizing that I might be lucky enough to live to 96 like my granddad, but even if I did, he was frail and he was old and he just fit for his age. But what can he do? If he went, he can't really travel now. And what if I don't get lucky? What if it's not 96? I don't know, and none of us know how much time we got. So I think I took from your book, Dan, actually, correct me if this isn't you, but I really liked you spoke about your goal was to make as much money as possible whilst working 3 days a week. Was that you?
Yeah, I kind of
similar.
I wanted to hit a net figure of a 3-day week. And the idea being that 3 days would be dedicated to my professional purpose. I'd have a day to myself, a day with my wife, and then this kind of longer weekend where we as a family unit are all flourishing and thriving. And the truth is, we're all work in progress, and that ambition of mine hasn't manifested in a way that I had intended. And now what I've decided to do, because for me to achieve that figure in a 3-day week meant that there was an intensity that wasn't sustainable. What I've now decided to do is take 80% of my children's school holidays off. And so far, the last 18 months, I've been successful in that. So yeah, being able to, instead of seeing work and life as very separate entities, being able to integrate them in a way that is sustainably successful for me. Which, yeah, some people don't have perhaps the opportunity to do that because they're not self-employed and they're governed by external factors. But if you're running a business, the reality is that you are the decision maker. You're not on the clock. You're not having to work 60, 70-hour weeks. You don't have to take your laptop on holiday. You don't have to be contactable at all times. But the moment you pick up your phone and you look at your emails, you're not with your family. You're not where your feet are. You're not. You might be physically present, but you're not emotionally present in the room or the conversation. So yeah, it's. I think that, yeah, it's important to recognize that, like, we're all, as I said, work in progress. And I have a relative who was at 100 earlier on this year, and the truth is, for me, that longevity isn't a sign of success. We think that longevity in a career or a relationship in life is a sign of success, and it's a falsity. Like, just because somebody reaches 100, when they've been frail and lack the independency for the best part of 15 years, as you'll be familiar with Dr. Peter Attia. He's got this concept of health span instead of lifespan.
Yes.
And yeah, it's like, for those that aren't familiar with it, it's the idea that, by prioritizing our health and our wellness, we can live more engaging and successful lives. And by the definition of improving our health span over a period of time, particularly in midlife, the likelihood is that we'll take that age kind of fluidity into our later decades and have a higher degree of autonomy and independence, and ultimately live better lives because we're taking responsibility for our health and wellness.
Absolutely. And if you've got a spare 36 hours, his audiobook's fantastic. It's fucking long. It's so long. But I really like Peter Attia. I like his approach to parenting. Actually, is another thing he has some really interesting topics on. Let's talk about diary management, Dan, if you don't mind. You touched on it earlier. It's something that I am huge on. I'm really in my clients' faces about it, and I'm quite vocal on the socials. I subscribe to, it's a really old video that was doing the rounds virally on YouTube and social media years ago, and it's the rock, pebbles, sand in the jar. Do you know it?
I'm familiar with the concept.
Right. I really like that, and it spoke to me a long time ago, and more so now. So every Sunday, my wife and I take 20 minutes. We sit down and we just look at the week ahead. This week's a great example, right? This week for me, work-wise, is all over the place. On top of that, my son's teething. We're not getting much sleep. And my thing is Brazilian jiu-jitsu. It's my big passion. I love it. I can't do jiu-jitsu this week because of work and the way it's panned out and all these things. But I have to train 5 to 6 days a week. It's, yes, for physical, but for the mental, most important. I have to get it in.
I get it.
So we're looking at, so that's our rocks. Our rocks are training, spending time as a family unit, any significant social times. I don't always believe that work is a rock. Sometimes some of the big stuff, but I think a lot of the time work-related items are, I used this kind of cheesy phrase a couple of weeks ago on a piece of content. Work is a pebble in a puffer jacket. It looks like a rock, but if you strip it away, actually it's not really that. But just 20 minutes a week, and we're able to get in front of the diary, kind of go, cool, we need to move this, and this. And again, I know it's easy because we work for ourselves. It's, if you're mandated to be in the office and in meetings at certain times, I know it's not that easy, but just understanding that I'm not going to take those back-to-back lunchtime meetings because I need to eat. And if I don't eat, that's going to have a knock-on effect on my health and my performance and my mood. And so could you speak to that a little bit? Because I know this is something that you're very good at and you see real value in.
Yeah, just to pick up on your experience here, Rob, 3 things really stand out. Firstly, you and your wife are what I would term living life by design. Instead of just by default experiencing your life as a reflection of your diary, you're sitting down and taking even just 20 minutes to be deliberate and to check what's in your diary. The other part here for me is kind of noticing that the transitions. Like, instead of just allowing your day to start probably when you check your emails first thing in the morning and finish kind of exhausted on the set in the evening, there's a process of managing the transitions throughout the day, which enables you to set your intention, to bring the relevant energy to each interaction. And the third thing is prioritizing your priorities. So many people don't do it. They just kind of wake up in the morning believing that their battery's full from usually an inadequate night's sleep.
Yes.
Kind of go throughout their day where they believe that everything's just draining their battery, where we know, because we take greater responsibility for our energy. And we also recognize that our energy is contagious and it impacts others, that we need to protect our energy. We need to, and we need to be able to change our energy. So yeah, kind of my approach to this, usually because my children are 7 and 5, I go onto the school's website. I take down the school holiday dates for the academic year ahead. I put those straight into my diary so they're protected. Then I sit down with my wife and we have one date day a month. Like you, the complexities of everyday life is never ending. You know, the phrase that people use nowadays is the sandwich generation, which we are most definitely in. We have the kind of dependencies on both sides, aging parents or relatives, and also our children. Added into the mix is the dynamics of busy and successful businesses. So yeah, we put our date days in for the entirety of the year. Then what I kind of do then is I go straight to my Men and Mountains, which is it's a community project. There's no cost or commitment to join the walking group itself. Put the Men and Mountains dates in, usually at least a quarter, if not 6 months in advance. Then I reach out to my friendship groups. Like, guys, like, what's on our radar for this year? Is it some golf? Is it some hiking? Earlier on this year, I brought a real sense of freedom and liberation into my life by passing my motorbike test.
Congratulations.
So yeah, it feels really significant, and as a representation of this chapter of my life, which is about freedom and about liberty. And then I start looking at work. So kind of have this long-term plan of what my year looks based on how I want it to feel, around keeping my priorities important to me and making them substantially noticed in the diary. And then I have a kind of a weekly framework as well, where me and my wife, like similar to you and yours, we have this kind of training or exercise routine where we both have the opportunity to invest in our wellness. Some of it is just for ourselves. Other aspects for my wife is to meet her girlfriends and they go for a walk and they talk about what's going on in their lives, or they go to yoga together. For me, I train with my brother-in-law once a week and I run with a good friend of mine once a week. And it kind of those moments of connection facilitated through exercise are really important to both of us. And yeah, it's 168 hours in a week. And I know that it only takes you and your wife 20 minutes, but the truth is that when my wife and I decided to rebuild a new marriage after separating, you know, a key part of this was sitting down at some point between a Friday and a Sunday and being very deliberate around what our weeks looked like, and to make sure that they were at least aligned so they couldn't be in conflict. And to anybody listening to this, you know, we kind of have this assumption, particularly in the UK, where we think that like kind of seeking help of any kind is, you know, it's because there's something wrong, where I think that prevention is better than cure. And by sitting down and talking about our challenges, maybe in a fairly kind of uniform way, like what's working well, what do we need to focus on, what are our pressures this week, what do we need help with, you know, that conversation is such a valuable investment of time, and bringing us back to where we kind of started this passage of conversation. Like, living life by design is not the norm. Most of us live default lives where we live the same days, the same weeks, the same months over and over. And before we know it, we've gone from 30 to 40 to 50. And you know, we live in a state of maybe silent discomfort.
I would agree. Dan, tell me if you disagree with this. I won't be offended if you don't agree.
Sure.
It is easier for you and I to live life by design. However, even if you are in an employed 9 to 5, although sadly the 9 to 5 doesn't really exist anymore, you can still do this. You just have to almost start in reverse. So you almost have to put your pebbles and your sand in first from 9 or 8:30 when I start my commute to 5:30 when I get home. Can't really do much there, but I do have 12 till 2 as an opportunity to find half an hour to work out. I'm going to pause to eat good quality food. I'm going to go straight from the work to see my mates or to the gym, or maybe I'll do that before work. So it is possible, because I get met with a lot of resistance from this, particularly because a lot of my clients are not 9-to-5 guys. The nature of their business doesn't allow them. They'll never be 9-to-5 again. It's not going to happen for them, sadly, unless they were to move away from what they do. So they kind of go, well, how am I supposed to do that when I've got this, and this, and this? And on a couple of occasions now, we'll be on a call like this, and I said, just share your diary with me, share your screen. Right, okay, cool. So what are you doing there? Oh, I'll be catching up on emails. Yeah, no, you're going to get up and go for a walk. You can catch up on your emails, just walk. Do it on your phone, just move. You've got 3 back-to-back meetings from 12:30 till 2:30 over your lunch. So when were you going to eat? Oh, I'll just grab something on the go. Which is the least important? This one. Okay. Do you need to be in it? Not really, but I'm expected to be. Get gone. And so just being deliberate about how we can find the time to, because here's the thing that I noticed, and I was really bad for this as well, because I was an executive headhunter, and my job was to close deals, get people across the line, and that was kind of it. I'll call the guy that I need to make a decision whilst they're on holiday. I was that guy, and I'm not super proud of it, but I was expected to do the same. And what I've noticed since stepping away is that no one else really gives a shit about whether you've had lunch, whether you've managed to work out, when the last time you saw your kids were, what time you're putting them to bed, because they just want their pound of flesh. So if you're not really deliberate in setting boundaries, then people will take the piss. And something I got particularly good at the end, and maybe it was out of frustration, talked about earlier I think I've talked about every podcast I've done so far, a little bit about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. That's my thing. Personally, I like it because it's an hour and a half, completely immersive. It's really hard to worry about what's going on in the office when you've got 20-stone guy on your chest trying to choke you unconscious. So it's very immersive in that regard. But it was also mine. It was my time. And so I'd get a call from a client as I'm walking through the door saying, Rob, we've got this situation.
Yeah.
Cool. What is it? It's this. Yeah, I'm dealing with that tomorrow morning. I'm going to be from 7:30 till 9. I'm going to be in the gym training. I'm not picking it up after. This sounds like it can wait till the morning. Would you agree? And I'll say, yeah. Very, very rarely. In a couple of occasions working with startups where they were like, it's business critical. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of what I get paid to do. But I think setting boundaries is, and I think you talk about that as well at great length. It's so important.
Yeah, it's and this is the issue nowadays because of social media. We think that if everybody nowadays should know what a boundary is. Right. Let's start there. But because we've always been told by social media and personal development gurus that we should have boundaries, it's kind of become a bit of a platitudinal statement, But the whole concept of boundaries, if I'm really frank, is to protect our time, effort, and energy for the things that are really important to us. And if we don't have those boundaries around our accessibility, or around our work schedule, or boundaries around at least having 20 to 30 minutes for lunch, or for getting 10,000 steps a day, or a boundary around what time we go to bed, the likelihood is that kind of everything will just kind of become enmeshed into one big kind of pot of importance, and we lose sight of our priorities. We might take our health for granted. We might become complacent around our sleep or neglect our relationships. And that's why having boundaries is really, really important. And a boundary, usually it's a chap called Ray Dalio, who's a fantastic book called Principles. He's, I think he's still today the global leader of the world's largest hedge fund. And he has a very simple equation: pain plus reflection equals progress. And for context, pain is anything that's unwanted. Frustration, resentment, anxiety, insomnia, whatever it might be, irritability. Anytime we feel a sense of pain, reflect on where it's coming from. And the likelihood is that we need some kind of boundary to manage how the source of that pain is, where it's coming from and how it's affecting us. So with a boundary, you need to be able to label it succinctly. Like, I have a boundary around, for me, it doesn't sound like a lot, Rob, but it's a real transition from morning to afternoon. I have a 20-minute lunch break, like 20-minute lunch break, where I just don't have my phone anywhere near me. I leave it in my office. You can see here I'm up in the attic of the house. I go downstairs. Usually my food's already prepared. I will kind of, if it's not raining, which is a rarity in South Wales, I'll go into the back garden. I'll have my lunch in the garden, or I'll play, throw the ball with my dog and have that kind of moment of connection, or listen to some music on around the house. But that's a real boundary for me. So be able to say what the boundary is, communicate it with others. When people say, "Oh, Dan, have you got 10 minutes at this time?" But sorry, no, that's my lunch. Like, you got to be able to uphold it. So label the boundary, communicate it well, and when it's tested, uphold it. That's it. It's as simple as that. So reflect on where your sources of pain are coming from. It might be that you don't have time for lunch break. The feedback loop in terms of the scales, or your clothes, the scales are showing a heavier weight, or your clothes aren't fitting in the way that you'd want. See that as a source of pain, of discomfort. Okay, what do I need to do? Well, I need to eat less or move more. So have a boundary, around your calorie consumption, or around your step count, or your exercise component, whatever it might be. But once you've established a boundary, you need to communicate it with the people that are likely to infringe against it. And over time, if you withhold your boundary and you kind of push back when it's tested, people will get the message. People will get the message.
Dan, how do you, sorry to cut in, mate, how do you deal with, or how would you advise people to deal with the passive aggressive corporate bullshit when it comes to, Dan, we need you to be a team player today, mate, we got loads of work on, or we know this project's business critical, so it's all hands on deck. You hear that all the time, and the bigger the corporation, I guess the more toxic the bullshit. How would you advise someone to deal with that?
What we're talking about here is culture. Right. Culture is essentially about how an organization or a company or a business does things. And hopefully now there is kind of a shift in leadership dynamic. A significant percentage of my client base are lawyers, solicitors, barristers. And the idea is that, when you make partner in a law firm, that then you've proven your worth to make partner. And then all of a sudden you have to prove your worth again to demonstrate that promotion has been worthwhile. And that's kind of the paradox of promotion, that the more that we're paid, the more that we feel we have to give this pound of flesh. A pushback that my clients will often use. Well, if you want me to say yes to this, like, here are my current priorities, which one do you want me to say no to?
Like it.
Or, yes, I can do that, but here's when I'll have that ready for you. So it's on your own terms. So instead of feeling like life has been pressurized or squozen from your existence, and maybe that's the operative word here, like people exist, especially in corporate cultures, that we choose to integrate work on our own terms. As an example, a guy who's fairly senior at Deloitte left the company, went on a sabbatical, was kind of pulled back to city life. There was an attractive proposition for him, a job that he'd wanted to do at a salary that he was willing to do it for. Back with Deloitte, and the scope of our work together was going back to the city, but on his own terms. And instead of that job kind of taking 78 hours a week, instead of being kind of immersed in this kind of after work drinks culture, leaving the house before his children woke and coming back after they'd gone to sleep, he was able to do his job in around about 50 hours, which still sounds like a lot of time. But the difference being now was that when he went on holiday, he didn't take his laptop. When he put his out of office was on, he would, if he came back to a bit of a shitstorm, he's like, I was on holiday. Are you really telling me that this business, global business, one of the top 4, can't function with just me away on holiday? And it's that silence that forced the leaders to kind of recognize that maybe the culture, maybe their expectations, maybe their style of leadership wasn't fit for purpose for a modern day business.
Very good. Very interesting. Dan, I'm cautious of time. I know how busy you are, but there's two things I'd really like to get onto with you. Firstly, is the book.
Yeah.
It's an amazing read. There's a few books. I'm not a good reader, but I'm an avid reader. I'm not particularly fast. But this book, had I've read this prior to, so I read this, for those, I said this to you off kind of off air, but
Yeah.
I read this book after I'd made the decision to leave, and I was like, shit, man, you stuck around too long. There's a bit of a juxtaposition, or a bit of a catch in the sense that the work that I did and the money that I made has afforded me the opportunity to come and do this. So there's that, but there was a lot of stuff that perhaps I put up with, or I allowed to happen to me, or I didn't take control of. How did this come to be? It's a big deal, writing a book and selling the numbers that you have. How did it happen?
Yeah, the honest kind of answer here is that it was part of a marketing strategy. When I realized that I had the potential to impact a lot of people and create these positive ripples of consequence, not just through men as individuals, but through their families, through their businesses, and this cultural kind of piece around asking these bigger questions about the future of masculinity. I joined a business program by a chap called Daniel Priestley. He's fairly well known now because
very good.
Yeah. And Daniel's narrative is that nothing sells you like a book. So kind of when I decided that I would kind of write a book, it was purely on the premise of a marketing message. And then by the time I kind of composed or put the framework of the context of the book, and especially the first chapter together, I realized it was much more than the marketing message. I realized that it was significant that all these different aspects of challenge around the way that modern men face and experience today, nobody has put it together in such a simplistic and accessible way. And such a pragmatic way. At the end of every chapter, there's a series of reflection prompts, which means that, as a reader, you're almost forced and challenged to hold the mirror up and be self-honest, which is often the hardest kind. And I kind of just had this real feeling of fire in my belly as I was writing it and putting it together. The beta readers that kind of I knew would be candid and honest about how they interpreted the book gave some really important kind of feedback / feed forward, which enabled me to kind of sharpen the message. I'm really proud. And actually, the significant part about the book, Rob, despite all the things that I mentioned earlier around kind of an award-winning military career and standing on national sporting podiums and all the other kind of societal success, this was the first thing that I did that felt as though it wasn't for the validation of others. It was important for me to share my appreciation and my best thinking around the need to rethink masculinity with the men of today.
And I think you've done it so well. And to hear that initially it started off as a marketing thing is quite a shock, because it doesn't come across like that. At no point do I feel like you're selling me anything or you're trying to build your own stock. The self-reflection piece at the end of every chapter, what I really liked about it is it's if you read this book, you're gonna have to feel uncomfortable at times, particularly when you are going through that self-reflection piece.
Yeah.
And because you're reading it in silence on your own, and what I would do is I started off on my phone, but I read at night, so that didn't work. So I switched to a notepad. Because it's your own private thoughts, you can be very honest. And what I found was that I would start with bullet points. So I would just kind of go this. And as I worked through, I noted that I was writing more. I started to almost open myself up a little bit. Yeah. And I think, again, had I read it sooner, which seems to be the overall feedback about the book, I would have made some pretty significant life decisions sooner. I really think it's phenomenal. I think it's amazing how it touches on the way that even myself, I just fall into the millennial bracket, still just about young enough. But it talks about how perhaps my dad's generation, my granddad's generation, and how that I get careful around the term toxic masculinity because I think it's too easily thrown around. But
Yeah.
The old blueprint or the old ways, how that has bled into even my life and some values that I hold. Like, Jesus, I sound like my dad when I say that. So that's, yeah, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but I'm so passionate about this book, and it's I thanked you actually just before we got started for writing it, because it's one of the most important books I've ever read.
Thank you, Rob. I sincerely mean that. And yeah, I was challenged on the title. A couple of people said it sounded as though it's gonna be like kind of a real academic read. But I think, you know, most people couldn't define what masculinity is, but ultimately it's a social construct, and
Right.
and by definition of being a social construct, it is transient. And that's why I said early on that, you know, what worked for men of previous generations is no longer fit for purpose. And if we don't make a stand and raise our awareness around the challenges that modern men face, we're simply just going to pass those on to future generations. And for me, that'd be a real travesty. So yeah, from a marketing message to something that's very much purpose driven, yeah, even to the point where, you know, I'd advise people to get it from my website for just postage at £3.50 instead of paying Amazon £14. Jeff Bezos takes a disproportionate amount of that money, and I would get less than £1 a copy anyway. So if you're whether you're a man or a woman, whether you're in a midlife crisis or you feel like you have some questions that you can't answer, you know, if you're really curious about the concepts that we talked about here today, just go to my website, better-men.uk. I'm sure Robbie will include the links in the show notes, and I'll post you a copy for just the £3.50 Royal Mail first class postage.
I mean, it's such good value. For you won't spend about £3.50, and yeah, it's a real must read. Dan, talk to me a little bit before we go about BetterMen and Men and Mountains and the work you're doing on the coaching side, because I know there's going to be guys listening to this that will really value from that style of coaching and that style of community that you've created.
Yeah, I'll start with Men and Mountains. Born out of my own feeling of loneliness when I kind of decided to take this time out from life, you know, and it was almost a sabbatical. At the same time, I did and kind of conducted an exercise that, you know, that despite actually the language is very, very appropriate. I had a friendship cult. I stepped away from a lot of the friendships and the WhatsApp groups whose values I felt were different from my future trajectory. I wasn't interested in locker room humor. I couldn't care less about, you know, having to drink alcohol to have honest conversations, and just stepped away from all of those kind of friendship groups. And the reality was that my social calendar kind of pretty much dried up. And rather than kind of adopting a bit of a victim mindset or kind of allowing myself to kind of move back towards these friendship groups that I felt misaligned with, I invited a few people that I felt had strong, reliable moral compasses to come out and join me on a walk. I've been a mountain leader in the military, and a few guys came out on a Sunday. It was a hard, challenging walk. The weather was against us, but the conversation and the connection was really palpable. And we did have a pint in the pub at the end. And as we were kind of finishing off, you know, the guy said, "When are we going to do this next?" And there's that moment of realization, like there's something in this. And that's exactly what Men and Mountains is about. We walk so we can talk. We have this kind of peer-to-peer conversations where people leave their egos and their identities back at home, or at least in the car park. Yeah, you know, whether you know somebody or whether you've never met them before, you know, having very open and honest dialogue around our experiences of life is really, really helpful. As I said earlier, no cost or commitment, but there is a need to be physically fit. We walk 8 to 10 miles, usually in the Brecon Beacons, but we've been out to the Alps, to the Atlas Mountains in North Africa. We've been up to Snowdonia in the Lake District. So there's a real sense of connection in a peer-to-peer community. More specifically, with BetterMen, I offer 3 services. My lowest offering is a consultation. It's kind of an opportunity to sit in a space, a reflective space, for 90 minutes, where we will ask thought-provoking questions, where we'll perhaps maybe double-click on the areas of life that we feel are either causing us pressure or we feel like we're stuck. And ultimately, we come away with kind of a self-prescribed action plan to move us forward and to break that cycle of inertia. I have what I call an intervention program. I think almost all of my clients are very solution-focused. So it's 10 sessions, typically 4 to 5 months of time frame. And then at the top end, I have a year-long program. There's so many different modalities that sit under the banner of coaching that my kind of personal approach is about having a conversational space where there's a real sense of self-honesty. There's a real sense of connection and rapport between me and my client base. And ultimately, I think that, we all have our own answers. It's about facilitating that space for us to access our own answers, and then to provide the accountability for us to action those answers so that we experience life in new and better ways. And over the last kind of 6 years, it's just been a real interesting and exciting journey. And I don't know where it's going to go next, but one thing's for sure: wherever it goes, it won't be at the detriment of my health, my connection, my relationships, or my capacity to parent my children.
I love it, Dan. I'm so grateful that you are doing what you're doing. I know because you speak to people on a regular basis, but it's really making a difference. For a business leader who I really respected and had a great relationship. Sean, actually, funnily enough, the guy I mentioned at the outset of the show who put me onto you, is an ex-client, a guy that I have tremendous respect for. As soon as I got into what you were talking about, I was like, this is missing. There's a couple of guys I hold in really high regard that talk about the stuff you're talking about, but I really do think you're leading it. So a real pleasure to have you kind of close the season for me on the Helpful Executive podcast. Before we let you go, is there anything that you think is kind of really valuable, anything that you maybe haven't covered today that you'd like to share, 1 or 2 points for us to take away and think about as a final thought?
Yeah, I think the last point is around kind of loneliness. I think that it is the biggest factor affecting the wellness of modern day men. And despite perhaps being time poor, despite existing in a state of work-life conflict instead of balance, like it's imperative that we set aside the time and the energy to invest in our relationships. If we don't do this as we age, the likelihood is that we will become lonely. We'll live in isolation. So many of your listeners will probably be familiar now with the Harvard longitudinal study around that what affects our capacity to enjoy a life that we live. And the biggest aspect of it is social connection. If we leave it to chance, it won't happen. So I invite you to do a bit of an audit on the state of your friendships, and to recognize that without that investment, that deliberate investment in those relationships, they will wither over time. Don't let that happen. Be the person that is the catalyst for friends, either reconnecting or making new memories.
I had a guy called Roger Saville, who's a mental health counsellor. He was my therapist actually just off the back end of COVID. I needed to take some time to work on myself. He came on the pod and he said, for guys and girls, that if you're feeling lonely, go and find your tribe. If you're into baking, go and join a cooking class, or whether that's martial arts. I mean, I'm going to keep pushing jiu-jitsu. I haven't seen a community like it. I've been involved in sports all my life. And there's a real sense of calm in a room full of people that can quite easily kill you, there is zero ego, because everybody can kill you. So but go and find these tribes, these relationships, and work at them. And it's something that I've, similar to you, I've had to leave a few friends behind because they weren't willing to take the journey with me.
Yeah.
And that's fine, and I wish them well. But I'm really working at the moment on trying to build new relationships with new people, and people I admire and I respect. And you'll be amazed, right? Just put yourself out there. It's a little bit like, it's a bit cliche, like kind of asking the pretty girl out on a date. You never know. Worst she can say is no. But the amount of people who I respect and admire, I just said, "Would you want to grab lunch one day and just hang out and just kind of talk?" And I'm yet to get a rejection. So just put yourself out there, because often with men, I think that we kind of we don't want to overcommit. We don't want to seem too eager. It's not very cool, and it's not very masculine.
Yeah.
Masculine inverted commas. So yeah, I'm big on that, Dan. I think that's a great point.
Yeah. When your little one is past teething, feel free to put your boots on and come and join us on the Men and Mountains.
I absolutely will. I absolutely will. And that's not just lip service on a podcast. I absolutely will do that. I think it would be fantastic to meet you in person and some of the guys. So, Dan, where can everybody find you, mate? What's your socials, etc.?
Yeah, my only social platform is LinkedIn. Just in the search box, Dan Stanley or BetterMen. All of the content that I do post is along the topics that we've discussed today. Not interested in being validated or likes or comments. I'm interested in provoking thought that enables good men to live better lives. So yeah, follow me on LinkedIn. Yeah, my website has a range of resources from, as we discussed, kind of the opportunity to get the book for just postage, and also there's a few diagnostic tools where we can self-assess our susceptibility to midlife crisis, perhaps whether to improve our understanding whether we need a coach, or even to look at the state of our work-life balance. So yeah, if people are sat with some ambiguity and they want a bit of assistance, those diagnostic tools are a great place to start.
Fantastic. Good man. Dan, thanks again. Guys, go and get this book, £3.50. It's obscenely good value. Appreciate you taking the time, Dan.
Okay. Thank you, Rob. Yeah, thank you.
Man.